Piston A.R. 15s. All the coolness and modularity of the A.R. without the dirty, nasty, going to the bathroom where it eats, direct impingement system. If you've been around this game long enough, you'll know that in the mid-aughts, Piston A.R.s kind of hit their stride. There was a ton of Piston A.R.s. Well, here we are in 2025. There are much less of the market share, but there are still a few Piston A.R.s out there. That's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, the right way, with God Almighty at the center, biblical, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Military, law enforcement, competition shooting, and some other stuff in the background. Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and fingers for battle. Okay, let's talk about Piston A.R.s. First, let's define what that is. Instead of your traditional, and we would say direct impingement, I know technically the regular A.R. is a piston system with the bolt being the piston, but for common vernacular, everybody calls it direct impingement or a DI gun, which is what I'm going to call it. The regular mil-spec, it's got a snorkel on top of the BCG, and that goes into a gas tube, and the gas tube pushes that back and forth. That's your traditional system. Your piston system works more like an AK or a SCAR 17 or many other guns where you have a piston that shoves back, hits the bolt, and that moves it back and forward. So why would you want this? Well, the main reason why it's appealing is if you've ever had the displeasure of having to clean, especially for inspection, an AR-15 bolt, it is a exercise in frustration. They get filthy. The whole self-cleaning thing, what that really means is you're dumping new dirty gas into the bolt carrier every time. There are some advantages to this system. The big advantage of the direct impingement system, the regular mil-spec system, is that it's been around more or less unchanged. The actual internal design for, 60, 70 years, came out in the 50s. So we got a lot of the bugs worked out in it. A lot of those bugs have come out over time, and we've pretty much got it down. The mil-spec, the size of the gas ports, all this other stuff. And because it's been around for so long, the whole term mil-spec, which I don't really like, but I'm going to use it because it's the industry standard, means that as long as it's a regular bolt carrier group, you could take one from a Colt and put it in a Bushmaster, put it in a, Palmetto State Armory AR-15, and they should all work relatively well. You may run into some minor tolerance stacking issues, but in general, they should all work. There is no mil-spec or industry standard for the piston system. Meaning if you get one from company X, it's probably not going to work at all in company Y. They're going to be completely different. Different piston systems, different bolts, all that stuff. Or bolt carriers, rather. They probably have the same bolt face, but they probably have different bolt carriers. So with all that being said, that's a big disadvantage. The major advantage is the bolts don't get really dirty and nasty. You can shoot them a bunch, take the bolt out. The bolt's still very clean. The operating system, the fine moving parts, they don't get anywhere near as dirty from firing. They could still get dirty from other stuff, but they don't get anywhere near as dirty from firing as the standard direct impingement system does. I like piston systems. I've had one for a long time. I really like it. And as I alluded to, in the mid-aughts, which is when I got mine, there was a big swing towards piston guns. To illustrate this point, Ruger, when it first came out with its first AR, not the one they make now, but I think it was the SR556 or their very first AR, that might be the name, I may be getting it wrong, it's been a while. But when they very first came out with an AR, they came out with it in a piston gun because that was the hot thing at the time in the mid-aughts. There was a lot of companies making piston ARs, coming out with piston ARs. It was the hot thing. And then over time, that market share kind of waned. And when we get back to now, today, 2025, the vast majority are back to direct impingement systems. Now, there was a time when if you'd asked me, I would have said that the piston system is better. I'm not there anymore. I think they're equal. They're good for different things. They're both very good. They both have advantages and disadvantages, which I've aforementioned, but they're both very good. There's a lot of things that have come along recently with direct impingement that helps. Things like, this has been around actually, the first AR-15s were, I believe, chrome-plated bolt carrier groups, and the military got away from that because of cost or whatever. But the fact that you can get a chrome bolt carrier group or a tin titanium nitride or just a nitride bolt carrier group, I think is far better than the garbage military phosphate finish. So that's helped. Also, if you're getting good quality ammo, the quality and tolerances and consistency of ammo nowadays is so much better than it was, even a few decades ago. So that's helped. Right now, if you ask me, I'd say they're pretty much even, whichever one you want. But you may want a Piston A.R. in 2025. So you could go find one of those used ones, like an old used Ruger from the mid-aughts, or there are still some options on today's market. And I'm going to talk about the ones that I know of. There's probably one or two small boutique, semi-custom gun companies that I'm not aware of. And I'm not talking about the not ARs, but are kind of look like ARs. Like, I'm not going to talk about the SCAR 16 because it's not an AR. It's a completely different system. Therefore, I'm not going to talk about its copiers. The PSA Jackal and the CZ Bren. I'm not going to talk about those because there's pretty much copies of the SCAR. I'm talking about ARs, and a purist would say nothing but the original Colt AR-15 is an AR-15. Okay, fair, maybe. But things that a lot of the other parts besides the bolt carrier group would swap out on. Like, you could swap out the trigger, you could swap out the butt stock, and it would still work because it's still basically an AR. That's what I'm going to talk about. Okay, that was a long but I think important preamble. The first one I'm going to talk about has been around since those mid-aughts, making Piston A.R. guns, and that is P.W.S, Primary Weapon Systems. They're a good gun. They're a good Piston A.R. This is probably my number one pick if I'm picking one today because they've been around that long, and they still make a Piston A.R. They still make a really good Piston A.R. So if you are looking for that, rock solid, dependable, nobody knows what the future holds, but as long as we have, an economy and the grid's still up and people are still buying, normal numbers of guns, that P.W.S is likely to be around. And I don't see the future. Maybe they have some problems I'm not aware of, but they've been a pretty stable company and pretty stable at making the P.W.S. Remember, one of the big disadvantages I said to piston guns is they're pretty much all proprietary. One company's piston is not going to work, or one company's bolt carrier group is not going to work in the others. So the fact that you can get spare parts, support, you don't have to, need to know a machinist or be a machinist to make a new part, that you can probably get the spare parts or send it into P.W.S for service if you're going to use it hard, which I would encourage you to. So P.W.S is going to be my number one recommendation here for the Piston ARs. They're a good one. They've made a good one for a long time. They have several different models, which I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I'm just going to tell you that the P.W.S makes a really good AR-15, and they make a really good Piston AR-15. So there's that. The next one I'm going to talk about, I don't see going anywhere for a while, and that is, you could argue whether this is an AR or not, but the SIG MCX. It's very close, probably closer to an AR-180 if I'm being honest, but I think a lot of the parts still will interchange. So I'm going to put it on here, the SIG MCX. This is a bit different because it doesn't have a buffer tube, which I consider an advantage, or doesn't need a buffer tube. You can use collapsible stock on it, and you could argue whether it's an AR-15 or not. I'm going to include it because it's a very blurry gray line. So let's say the SIG MCX. This is probably not going anywhere, despite what all the gun tube glitterati say about SIGs just exploding. That's not a real thing, I don't think. You have to show me evidence, not hearsay, not somebody drilling a bunch of holes and bashing stuff with a hammer. But SIG's probably not going anywhere for a while. Again, I don't see the future. The grid could go down tomorrow when it could all go away. But if things stay relatively normal, I think SIG's going to be around, and I think the SIG MCX is going to be around. It has a dual spring system, much like the old AR 180s. It's a good system. It doesn't crap where it eats. It's if you're familiar with an AR-15, you're probably going to be familiar with it. It's got some advantages. It's a good gun, and it's got SIG behind it. And SIG is a giant company, even compared to like P.W.S. It's not even close. I mean, SIG is one of the major firearms manufacturers in the world. So they're probably going to be around, and they're probably going to take care of you if you have a problem with your MCX. So I'm going to throw that out there. The MCX is a good piston option for an AR-ish type gun. The next one also from SIG, the SIG 516. These are not new. These have been around a while. They see some actual use in the real world, in the field, quite a bit. The SIG 516 is a pretty good, hard-use AR piston system that you can get and can have. Again, all the things I said before about the SIG, now you could hash it out between the two. The 516, I think, is definitely more like an AR-15, a traditional AR-15, than the one we just talked about, the MCX. But both are good. Take your pick. They're both robust. They're both quality-made firearms, and they both have that SIG backing, which if you just hate SIG because your favorite gun tube glitterati guy crapped all over them, and you're just not going to be seen with a SIG, that's fine. There's other options. But they're a good option, and SIG makes good guns. I'm not going to say everything they made ever was a good idea, but I think both of these are pretty good guns. So you've got the 516 and you've got the MCX. Now the other big one that I'm going to mention it because it's such a force, and I think it's going to see more and more adoption. It's used by a lot of militaries around the world. You can't really get one exactly the same. You can kind of maybe build one, but it's going to cost you so much. I can't really recommend it. If you're doing this, it's because you want to recreate what other people are using in the field, kind of, because you're not going to have the full auto version. But it's the HK 416. It's a good gun. The actual HK 416s are rock solid, dependable guns. The Marine Corps' new variant of that is a really good gun. But you're probably not getting that. You're probably trying to piece it together and get as close as you can. And you're probably going to pay an arm and a leg for it. And will it be a good gun? Yes. Will you be overpaying for it? I think so. So I'm going to briefly mention it. If you want to go that route, you certainly can. And if you want to get the most, exact copy while being select fire that you can of that, you can go down that rabbit hole. But I think you're going to end up paying more than you would for some of these other choices that are just as good in the field. Okay, there is another one. This also has some adoption in the real world, this company, and they kind of fly under the radar. I don't have personal experience with this company. I don't think I've worked at a lot of places, been a firearms instructor, for military, law enforcement, civilians. I've worked at a couple of different places, was a firearms instructor for what at the time was the largest, firearms instruction company in the country. So I've shot a lot of guns, a lot of which I probably don't remember. This may have been one of them, but as far as I can remember, or serious use, I don't have much experience with these or any, but it's L.M.T. And L.M.T. makes some really good high-quality ARs. I think they make the New Zealand Defense Force, or whatever they call their military, the New Zealand AR-15 rifle. But they make a piston gun called the M.A.R.S. And you may want to look that up. It's a very, very good gun. Everything I've ever heard about L.M.T. has been positive. They're not cheap, but they are a very, very good gun. So the M.A.R.S. gun by L.M.T. is a very good piston A.R. I think by all accounts, it's a very good, high-quality manufacturer. So if you're looking for a good, rock-solid gun that's made to really good tolerances, I think the L.M.T. might fit the bill. Okay, I'm going to talk about one that's my personal favorite because I've had it since the mid-aughts, and I shot that thing. Here's how much I've shot that thing. I don't know how many triggers I've worn through in it, but I shot it so much I wore through the buffer tube, if that can give you an idea of how much I've shot that gun. I literally wore through the buffer tube so that it snapped off because I shot it so many times. The bolt carrier group literally wore through the buffer tube, if that gives you an idea. I did send it back to the factory at some point. I've shot that gun a lot. Again, I've had it since the mid-aughts, and I can only guesstimate at the amount of rounds that I've put through it. I've used it in the real world, used it as a law enforcement officer. I used it as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters. I've used it for training class. I've used it for all kinds of stuff. It's a workhorse. It's the Adams Arms. And it's the Adams Arms Eva Light. I don't think they make that model anymore. And Adams Arms, I'm mentioning this because they had some, I guess, internal struggles, financial struggles. I don't really keep up with the gun industry drama. I'm more of a shooter. But they do still list them as at least uppers for sale. So my Adams Arms is amazing. It's ridiculously accurate. It's a ridiculously lightweight, ridiculously low recoil. And again, I have the old Eva Light with a Samson rail. Again, that's from like the mid-aughts, way before there was key lock and M-lock and key mod were fighting it out to be who was going to be the coolest guy on the block. But I've had that gun a long time. It's an amazing gun. I still have it. It's still one of my go-to ARs. That's a testament to how good they used to make them. Whether they still make them that good or not, I don't know. A lot of times when companies go through financial struggles, they have issues. I don't know if Adams Arms falls into that category. But I did just look before recording this podcast. There are uppers that are listed, and there are the conversion kits. And this is one of the cool things about Adams Arms. You can take your most regular ARs, and you can get their conversion kit, which I think is $250, and you get a brand new piston bolt carrier group and piston system that you can attach to a regular AR barrel, assuming it's got the right gas port and the right, diameter for that gas tube, which most of them are pretty standard. But you can get that kit and put it on an existing AR that you like and have a piston AR. You may or may not have to do something to the, fore end to make sure the piston fits in there, because it's a little bit taller, not much, a little bit taller than your traditional gas piston, or than your traditional gas tube, rather, the piston is. But a lot of handguards, and I think even this is how popular they used to be, the old Magpul, just like regular fore ends, they were designed to work with these piston systems, so they will work, because I've had those. So do your research on that and be careful, but you can convert a lot of existing ARs if you want to go there out. If you have an AR that you just love and you're like, I want to try a piston system, you could get one of these for $250. If you're a halfway decent gunsmith and you have some basic AR-15 tools, you can get this going. So the Adams Arms kits, and again, at least the one that I have, and I think I had two back in the day. I for sure had two Adams Arms. The other one I sold, not because there was anything really wrong with it, because I was upgrading to the Eva Light, which I still have, which is phenomenal. So back in the day, their quality was great. I hope they still are. So I'm mentioning that because you can get that kit and convert an existing AR. And they do also have uppers that you can just put on a regular lower. So there is that if you're interested in that. And again, there may be some other ones that I don't know about, but those are some ones that give you some good options in 2025 if you still want to go down the AR piston design rabbit hole. Again, there are some advantages, there are some disadvantages. But it's nice to know that if you want to go that route in 2025, there are still some good options. Your tactical tip of the day: if you're running a not piston AR, but a regular mil-spec type of DI system, and you're doing it for anything serious, it's going to be your bug-out gun, you're going to, hard use, you're going to deploy with it literally, private security contracting or otherwise. You're going to do a long deployment with it, or it's going to be like your one gun or your truck gun even. It's a good idea to get a complete separate bolt carrier group. And you can find these on sale, PSA's daily deals sometimes, or they're on sale at whatever website. Just get, even if you want a better bolt carrier group in your day-to-day, just get a regular one of those old mil-spec phosphate bolt carrier groups. Because a lot of the time when something breaks on a traditional AR, it's in the bolt carrier group. Most of the small parts that break, there's a lot of small parts on an AR, which is one of the reasons I don't like them. But that being said, most of those parts are easily replaceable. A lot of those parts are in a bolt carrier group. Broken extractors, of which I've had to deal with. You lose that little pin, drop it in the dirt, the sand, that holds it all together. Bad firing pins. I've even seen bolt carrier groups smash and crack. So just having a complete new bolt carrier group where you can take one out and drop one in. If it's going to be, your bug out bag gun, your truck gun, you're going to keep it in like a soft case with extra pockets, just buy an extra bolt carrier group. If it's just a fun gun, a range gun, who cares? Because, competition gun, you have a bad day, you just go home. But if that's your one rifle that you're depending on, having that spare bolt carrier group, that's a good idea. And having that in the bag or somewhere with the gun, not, at home in a safe. That's better than nothing, but having it where the gun is important. There's also a couple of other small parts you may want to consider that you would have. Your tactical verse of the day from Deuteronomy 8. That he might make you know that man shall not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.